You have exactly 10 seconds to choose your fate, little mortal. 1 year of servitude, or face my champion in the circle of ash where humans go to die. I should have been terrified. Any sane person would have been. But standing there in that crimson-lit VIP lounge, surrounded by creatures who'd been draining humans dry since before my great-grandmother was born, all I could think was how badly I wanted to drive a silver stake through Kolin Michaelson's perfectly sculpted chest. You know what they say about vampires, right? That they're immortal, untouchable, that they've survived centuries by being smarter and stronger than any human could ever be. Well, I'm living proof that sometimes immortality makes you sloppy. Sometimes it makes you arrogant enough to challenge the wrong waitress to a fight. And sometimes, just sometimes, that arrogance gets you a UV flash grenade to the face. My name is Rayna Cruz, and this is the story of how I went from serving blood wine to the most dangerous vampires in New Orleans to becoming the one thing a vampire king never expected: his equal. Someone who wouldn't bow. Someone who'd been trained since childhood to end his entire bloodline. But before we get to the good part, before I tell you about the night I made an entire room of immortals question everything they thought they knew about the food chain, let me ask you something. Ever wonder what you'd do if monsters were real? I stopped wondering the night my parents were drained dry in our living room while I hid in the closet, clutching my mother's silver dagger and praying they wouldn't smell my fear. Wherever you are right now, whether you're listening to this on your morning commute or winding down after a long day, I hope you're ready. Because once I start telling you what happened, how I infiltrated vampire society, how I fell for the one creature I was sworn to kill, how we tore down an empire built on blood and lies, you're not going to want to stop listening. If you're enjoying this already, do me a favor and hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Share this with someone who needs to hear a story about monsters, because I promise you by the end of this, you won't be sure which one of us fits that description. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for what comes next. But let me start from the beginning. I was 26 years old when I took the job at Crimson Manor. It wasn't supposed to be permanent, just deep cover while I gathered intelligence on Lucinda Thorn, the vampire empress who'd murdered my family 11 years earlier. The club had a reputation for being exclusive, the kind of place where humans either had connections or became the entertainment. The tips were supposed to be incredible. The access to vampire hierarchy even better. It seemed like the perfect infiltration point. I should have known better. My first night, the manager, a pale, twitchy man named Garrett who I'd later learn was a former hunter himself, pulled me into the supply room before my shift. His hands were shaking as he gripped my shoulders. "Listen very carefully," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "There are rules here. Rules that keep you alive." I nodded, expecting the usual service industry protocols. Smile at the customers. Don't steal from the register. Always upsell the premium blood types. When the VIP floor is in use, you don't go up unless specifically summoned. You don't look them directly in the eyes unless they command it. You don't ask questions about what you see or hear. And most importantly, he swallowed hard. If Kolin Michaelson is here, you treat him like a god. Understand? Kolin Michaelson? I asked, my heart suddenly pounding. The vampire king himself. Second only to Lucinda in power. I'd studied him for years, memorized his patterns, his history, his weaknesses. But I'd never expected to get this close this fast. Garrett's face went even paler, if that was possible. "Just do what I say and you might survive the week." I should have walked out right then. Should have recognized that fate was pushing me toward something I wasn't ready for. But I'd spent 11 years preparing for this. 11 years training in my family's ancient techniques, studying the Cruz grimoire, perfecting the alchemy that had made my bloodline legendary among vampire hunters. I wasn't about to walk away from the opportunity of a lifetime. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that the biggest threat wouldn't be the mission. It wouldn't be Lucinda or the vampires I was hunting. It would be falling in love with the one monster I was supposed to destroy. 3 months. That's how long I'd been serving blood wine to creatures who'd forgotten what it meant to be human. 3 months of bowing my head, averting my eyes, pretending I was just another fragile mortal grateful for the privilege of serving immortals. 3 months of swallowing my rage every time I passed a vampire who might have been there the night my parents died. Crimson Manor was exactly what you'd expect from a vampire nightclub. All Gothic arches and velvet drapes the color of fresh blood, crystal chandeliers that cast shadows instead of light, and a sound system that pulsed with music designed to make human hearts beat faster. The main floor was impressive enough, but it was the VIP level that truly revealed the hierarchy. That's where the ancient ones gathered, where deals were made and territories divided, where humans were occasionally drained dry and their bodies disposed of before sunrise. I'd been desperately trying to get assigned up there since day one. My double life was exhausting in ways I hadn't anticipated. By day, I trained in my studio apartment across the river, the one with blackout curtains, salt lines at every threshold, and enough weapons hidden in the walls to outfit a small army. I'd run through the Cruz family katas until my muscles screamed, practice my alchemy until the scent of garlic and silver burned my nostrils, study the grimoire my mother had died protecting. By night, I'd put on the uniform, black dress, white apron, practiced smile, and serve monsters while listening for any mention of Lucinda Thorn. The work was degrading. More than once, I'd had to stand perfectly still while a vampire inhaled deeply at my throat, commenting on my blood type like I was a vintage wine. But every overheard conversation was intelligence. Every name I learned was another piece of the puzzle. And I was nothing if not patient. Then came tonight. Garrett found me in the staff room and I knew immediately something had changed. His hands were shaking worse than usual as he pulled me aside, his eyes darting to make sure we were alone. "The VIP floor," he said quietly. "You're assigned tonight." My heart stuttered. 3 months of waiting and finally... "Kolin Michaelson is hosting a gathering," Garrett continued, and his voice dropped even lower. "Lucinda Thorn will be in attendance." The room tilted. Both of them. Together. This was it. My chance to get close to the Empress who'd slaughtered my family. But also the most dangerous night of my life. "Rayna." Garrett gripped my arm. "I know that look. Whatever you're thinking, don't. These aren't ordinary vampires. One wrong move and you won't leave that room alive." I forced myself to nod, to look appropriately nervous. Inside, my mind was already racing through scenarios, calculating angles, reviewing everything I knew about Lucinda's patterns and weaknesses. The VIP floor was even more opulent than I'd imagined. Fewer tables, more space, everything designed to make the powerful feel untouchable. And there, in the center of it all, sat Lucinda Thorn. She looked exactly like she had in my nightmares, beautiful in that terrible way ancient vampires are, with pale skin that seemed to glow and dark hair that fell like silk around shoulders that had never known the weight of conscience. She was laughing at something another vampire had said, and the sound made my blood freeze. This was the creature who'd drained my mother dry while my father begged for mercy. Who'd torn through my family's defenses like they were paper. Who'd left me, a 15-year-old girl, to find their bodies in the morning. My hand shook as I lifted the tray of blood wine. I barely registered moving toward her table, barely heard the conversations around me. All I could think about was how easy it would be to drop the tray, pull the silver blade from my thigh holster, and drive it through her heart before anyone could stop me. I'd die, of course. But she died too, and wasn't that worth it? "Careful, girl." The voice snapped me back to reality just as I stumbled. The tray tilted. The crystal glass of blood wine, vintage 1847 according to the label, which meant it was from actual humans, not the synthetic blend, tumbled through the air in slow motion. It didn't hit Lucinda. It hit the man sitting at the head of the adjacent table, the one I'd been too focused on my target to notice. Kolin Michaelson, the vampire king himself, wearing what was probably a $5,000 suit that was now soaked in crimson. The entire room went silent. Not the quiet of people holding their breath, but the absolute absence of sound that comes when predators freeze before attacking. Kolin stood slowly, blood wine dripping from his platinum hair, sliding down the sharp angles of his face. He was younger looking than I'd expected, appearing maybe 30, though I knew he was over 4 centuries old. And he was beautiful in a way that made my hunter instincts scream warnings. The kind of beauty that had lured countless humans to their deaths, that made them offer their throats willingly. His eyes met mine and I felt the weight of 400 years of existence in that gaze. Calculating. Every vampire in the room was watching, waiting to see how their king would respond to this insult from a mere human. I should have dropped to my knees. Should have begged forgiveness, played the terrified waitress who'd made an honest mistake. That's what my cover demanded. But something in me snapped. Maybe it was seeing Lucinda so close and knowing I couldn't touch her yet. Maybe it was 3 months of bowing and scraping to creatures who saw humans as food. Maybe it was 11 years of rage finally boiling over. I straightened my spine, met his eyes directly, absolutely forbidden, and said the words that would change everything. It was an accident. What more do you want? The gasp that rippled through the room was almost audible. Kolin's eyebrows rose slightly, the first hint of expression on that perfect face. He circled me slowly and I could feel his power pressing against my mental shields, testing, probing. An accident, he repeated, his voice like silk over steel. How unfortunate for you. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and old-world like leather and smoke. Close enough that any other human would be compelled by now, their will crumbling under the weight of his age and power. You have a choice, he said, and I heard Lucinda laugh softly in the background. Become my personal servant for 1 year at my complete disposal, to do with as I please. Or, his smile was sharp enough to cut. Face my champion in the circle of ash. An ancient vampire combat ritual where humans invariably die. It was meant to be an impossible choice. Servitude or death. Everyone in that room expected me to choose servitude, to throw myself at his feet and beg for the mercy of slavery. Thought of my parents, of my training, of the silver blades hidden in my apartment and the centuries-old techniques flowing through my veins. Of every vampire I'd studied and every weakness I'd memorized. I'll take the fight, I said clearly. The room erupted. Vampires hissed in surprise, some laughing at what they assumed was human stupidity. Lucinda's eyes narrowed slightly, her amusement replaced by curiosity. But it was Kolin's reaction that I focused on. His expression shifted, interest? Surprise. Something I couldn't quite read flickering behind those ancient eyes. Tomorrow night, he said softly. The circle of ash. Don't be late. As the vampires resumed their conversations and I was dismissed, I caught Lucinda watching me with calculating interest. And I realized with a cold clarity that I'd just put myself exactly where I needed to be, close to both my enemy and the vampire king. The question was, would I survive long enough to make it matter? I made it back to my apartment at 3 in the morning, hands still shaking from adrenaline. The moment I crossed the threshold, checking the salt lines first always, I pulled out the burner phone from inside the hollowed-out copy of Dracula on my bookshelf. Irony wasn't lost on me. You did what? The voice on the other end belonged to Father Torres, my handler and the closest thing the Hunter Network had to a leader. Rayna, your mission was intelligence gathering, not? I know what my mission was. I cut him off, pacing between my weapons cache and the window. But this gives us unprecedented access. When have we ever gotten a hunter this close to Kolin Michaelson? When have we ever had a hunter stupid enough to challenge a vampire king to ritual combat? His anger crackled through the line. You have 1 night to prepare for a fight against a 300-year-old vampire warrior. 1 night, Rayna. This isn't what your parents trained you for. But it was exactly what they'd trained me for. I spent that night the way my father had taught me, methodically, calmly, treating preparation like a meditation. As I mixed silver dust with holy water, I could hear his voice in my head. Vampires have superhuman speed and strength, Mija. But they're arrogant. They've lived so long that they've forgotten how to adapt. They have patterns. Learn the patterns and you can survive anything. My mother had been the alchemist, the one who'd passed down the Cruz grimoire with its centuries of forbidden knowledge. I pulled it out now, running my fingers over recipes written in her handwriting. Garlic smoke bombs. UV flash powders. Silver fire that burned vampire flesh like acid. Her last words to me, whispered as she bled out on our living room floor, echoed louder than my father's tactical advice. Stay human, mi amor. Don't let hatred make you the monster. I wasn't sure I'd kept that promise. Across the city, in a penthouse that overlooked the Mississippi, Kolin Michaelson stood at his window and wondered why he couldn't stop thinking about a waitress. He'd lived 417 years. He'd seen empires rise and fall, watched the world transform in ways that would have seemed like magic to his mortal self. He'd long ago stopped being surprised by anything humans did. And yet, she chose the circle, Dimitri said behind him, sounding amused. Brave or stupid? I haven't decided yet. Kolin turned from the window. His champion was everything a vampire warrior should be: massive, powerful, undefeated in 3 centuries of combat. This should be a massacre. A human girl against Dimitri was like throwing a lamb to a lion. So why had she chosen it? There's something different about her, Kolin said quietly. Her scent. Did you notice? Dimitri shrugged. She smells like human. Fear and adrenaline. But that wasn't quite right. Beneath the expected fear, her blood carried something else. A metallic tang that made Kolin's ancient instincts whisper warnings. Like steel and silver and something he couldn't quite identify. Don't play with her too long, Kolin said. I want to know what she is. The circle of ash was everything I'd expected and worse. They brought me down through the old tunnels beneath the French Quarter, past foundations that predated the city itself, to a chamber that looked like it had been carved by something other than human hands. The circle itself was marked with ash, the remains of vampires who'd broken the old laws and been burned alive as punishment. Hundreds of vampires filled the stone seats rising around the arena. This was entertainment for them. Watching a human die. I stood in the center of the circle, my heart hammering but my hands steady. I'd hidden my weapons carefully. Silver dust in my left sleeve, blessed water in a vial at my hip, UV flash grenades disguised as makeup compacts. The Cruz grimoire had taught me that the best weapons were the ones your enemy never saw coming. Dimitri entered from the opposite side and the crowd roared. He was massive, at least 6'5", built like he'd been a warrior even in his mortal life. He moved with the fluid grace that came from centuries of practice, his smile showing fangs that had torn through countless throats. I'll make it quick, little human, he called out, and the crowd laughed. He lunged with vampire speed, closing the distance between us in a heartbeat. Any normal human would have been dead before they could blink. I threw the silver powder. It ignited the moment he crossed through it, blessed fire that burned vampire flesh like acid. Dimitri screamed, stumbling back as his hands blistered and smoked. The crowd went silent. What? He started, but I was already moving. Speed over strength. That's what my father had drilled into me. A human couldn't match a vampire's power, but we could be smarter, faster in our thinking, more adaptable. I'd studied Dimitri's fights, watched grainy footage of his matches, memorized his patterns. He favored his right side. He overcommit to his strikes. He was used to opponents who fought with honor. I fought to survive. Garlic smoke bomb to obscure his enhanced vision. Blessed water that made him hiss and retreat. UV flash grenade that sent him reeling, his eyes burning from the concentrated artificial sunlight. The vampires in the crowd were murmuring now, shifting uncomfortably. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Dimitri adapted faster than I'd hoped. 300 years of combat experience meant he could adjust even through pain and surprise. He caught me with a backhand that sent me sprawling, tasted blood in my mouth. He was on me in an instant, fangs bared. I jammed my thumb into the pressure point at his throat, a technique that worked on vampires just like humans if you knew where to strike, and used his momentum to flip him over my shoulder. Before he could recover, I had his arm twisted behind his back, hyperextended to the breaking point. Yield, I gasped, or I break it beyond even your healing. For a long moment, Dimitri struggled. Then, through gritted teeth, I yield. The crowd erupted in chaos. Vampires were on their feet, shouting, some in outrage, some in disbelief. I released Dimitri and stood, every muscle screaming, blood dripping from a cut above my eye. Kolin Michaelson descended from his throne like a fallen angel, beautiful and terrible. He crossed the circle of ash and stopped inches from me. Up close, I could see that his eyes weren't entirely cold anymore. There was something else there, curiosity, hunger, and something that looked almost like recognition. Who are you really? He asked softly, his voice pitched from my ears alone. I met his gaze, saw the ancient intelligence behind those inhuman eyes, and told him the only truth I could. Someone who doesn't bow. Something flickered across his face. Respect? Interest? Danger? You won fairly, he announced to the crowd. By the old laws, you're free of all obligation. He paused, then added in that same soft voice, dine with me tomorrow night. Not as a servant. As my guest. It wasn't quite a request. But it wasn't quite a command either. Yes, I heard myself say and wondered if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life. As I left the circle, I caught Lucinda Thorne watching me with eyes that had seen 8 centuries of deception. She knew something was wrong with this picture. A human didn't fight like that. Didn't smell like that. Didn't survive like that. I'd painted a target on my back, but I'd also gotten closer to Kolin Michaelson than any hunter in living memory. Father Torres was furious when I called him. Extract what you can and get out. You're compromised. But as I lay in bed watching the sun rise over New Orleans, I couldn't stop thinking about the moment in the circle when Kolin looked at me. Not with contempt. Not with the casual cruelty vampires usually showed humans. With something that looked almost like respect. And God help me, part of me wanted to see that look again. Sangre Noir wasn't listed in any guidebook, didn't have a website, and you couldn't get a reservation unless you'd been dead for at least a century. The restaurant occupied the top floor of a building in the Garden District that had somehow survived every hurricane, every fire, every disaster that had touched New Orleans in the last 200 years. Magic or money, with vampires it was hard to tell the difference. Kolin's driver picked me up at sunset in a car that cost more than my entire apartment building. Every human we passed inside the restaurant moved with the glazed contentment of the compelled, serving immortals who'd long ago forgotten they were once mortal themselves. I had to actively maintain my mental shields, feeling Kolin's power pressing against my mind like silk-covered steel. My hunter training held, but God, he was strong. You're resisting, he said as we were seated at a private table overlooking the city. Not an accusation. An observation. Should I be flattered or concerned that you're trying to compel me? His smile was sharp. Neither. Simply my nature. Like breathing. But you're actively pushing back. Most humans don't even notice it happening. He leaned forward, candlelight catching the inhuman planes of his face. Where did you learn to fight like that, Rayna? The dance had begun. Verbal sparring wrapped in expensive wine and courses I barely tasted. My father was a martial artist, I said, which was true enough. He believed everyone should know how to defend themselves. And the alchemy? The silver fire. The internet is a wonderful resource. He laughed, actually laughed, and something in my chest tightened at the sound. You're lying. But beautifully. I'll allow it for now. He paused as the server brought blood wine, the real kind, vintage 1889. I was turned during the Renaissance. Florence. I was a painter's apprentice, nobody important. I wanted to create beauty, not rule territories. What changed? I got better at killing than creating. His expression darkened. The vampire who turned me built an empire through blood and terror. When he was finally destroyed, his territory needed someone to prevent chaos. I never wanted to be a king, Rayna. But sometimes we become what's necessary rather than what we desire. I wasn't prepared for the complexity in his voice. Wasn't prepared to find philosophy and regret in a creature I'd been trained to see as a monster. As the dinner progressed, he spoke of watching Da Vinci work, of the weight of watching centuries pass while everyone you'd known crumbled to dust. He told me he didn't kill humans, fed only from willing donors who were compensated generously, who came to him by choice. I've created laws in my territory, he said quietly. Rogues who hunt humans without consent face permanent death. We can coexist, I believe. We don't have to be predators. This didn't fit. None of this fit the image of vampires I'd built from years of studying their atrocities, from my parents' deaths. I felt my carefully constructed hatred wavering, and it terrified me more than any combat. Why did you really choose to fight instead of serve? Kolin asked, and his eyes held something I couldn't quite name. The truth came out before I could stop it. I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees. Understanding flickered across his face. Recognition of a kindred isolation. Yes, he said softly. I know that feeling well. The moment stretched between us, charged with possibility and danger. Then Garrett appeared at our table, a breach of protocol so severe that Kolin's expression immediately hardened. "Forgive the interruption," Garrett said, his voice tight with fear. "Rayna, a word?" In the hallway he gripped my arm. "Lucinda's been asking questions about you. About the fight. She knows something's wrong. You need to be careful, maybe disappear for a while." When I returned, Kolin's demeanor had shifted, cooled like marble. "Are you in danger?" he asked directly. "Isn't everyone in your world?" "Don't deflect. I'm asking if someone is threatening you specifically." The concern in his voice shouldn't have warmed me. Shouldn't have made me want to tell him everything. "I can handle myself." "Yes," he said, his eyes traveling over me in a way that had nothing to do with compulsion and everything to do with very real desire. I noticed. He insisted his driver take me home, walked me to the car through the alley behind the restaurant. In the shadows between streetlights he stopped, turned me to face him. The tension that had been building all night finally broke. He kissed me, and it wasn't compulsion. I would have felt that, would have recognized the magical push against my will. This was real desire, dangerous and electric, and I kissed him back like my life depended on it. Like he wasn't the thing I'd sworn to destroy. Like I wasn't the weapon meant to end him. When we broke apart, both breathing harder than necessary, he kept his hands on my face. "I don't know what you are, Rayna Cruz," he whispered. "But you're not just a waitress. And I'm going to find out your secrets." Before I could respond, he was gone, moving with vampire speed that left me alone in the alley with my racing heart and the taste of him still on my lips. The driver made it 3 blocks before the attack. 3 vampires moving faster than the car, forcing us to a stop in an empty street. The driver was compelled instantly, slumping over the wheel. I was out the door before they could reach me, silver blade already in my hand, the one I kept strapped to my thigh for exactly this scenario. They came at me with professional coordination, too skilled to be random rogues. I fought with everything my parents had taught me, using speed and technique against their strength. When my blade found the heart of the first vampire, he crumbled to ash with a scream that echoed off the buildings. The other 2 hesitated, just long enough for me to see the mark on their necks. Lucinda's seal. This wasn't random. This was a message. I took them both down, left them as ash in the street, and ran the remaining blocks to my apartment. The door was open. Salt lines broken. Someone had been inside. I moved through my apartment with my blade drawn, but whoever had been here was long gone. Nothing was taken. Not the weapons, not the grimoire, not the research I'd carefully hidden. But on my bathroom mirror, written in blood that was still wet enough to drip. "I know what you are, little hunter. And soon so will he." Lucinda's handwriting. I'd seen it in archived hunter records, studied her patterns. She'd been here. In my home. While I'd been having dinner with Kolin. My cover was blown. The vampire empress knew I was a hunter, which meant I was living on borrowed time. But worse, if she told Kolin before I did, I'd lose any chance of the alliance I was beginning to realize I desperately needed. Because somewhere between the circle of ash and that kiss in the alley, something had changed. Kolin Michaelson wasn't just my target anymore. He was becoming something far more dangerous. Someone I was starting to trust. The summons came at midnight. A formal invitation delivered by one of Lucinda's thralls, written on paper that smelled faintly of old blood. Not a request. A command. Refusing would confirm every suspicion the Empress had, and we both knew it. Lucinda's estate sat on the outskirts of New Orleans. A plantation house that had survived since before the Civil War through means that had nothing to do with historical preservation. Spanish moss hung from ancient oaks like funeral shrouds, and the air itself felt heavy with old magic and older sins. She received me in a parlor decorated with artifacts that belonged in museums. If museums collected the personal effects of people who'd been drained dry. Lucinda looked exactly as she had the night she'd killed my parents. Beautiful, terrible, utterly without conscience. Rayna Cruz, she said, my family name a curse in her mouth. The last of the hunter bloodline I personally destroyed. I wondered how long it would take you to find me. My hand instinctively moved toward the silver blade hidden at my spine, but 6 of her enforcers materialized from the shadows. Running wasn't an option. I could kill you now, Lucinda continued, circling me like a shark scenting blood. But I'm offering you something better. Join me. Help me remove Kolin from power and I'll let you live. More than that, I'll help you have your revenge on the vampire world properly. He's weak, too attached to humans, too bound by outdated honor. Together we could reshape everything. The offer was poison wrapped in opportunity. And it told me something crucial. Lucinda saw Kolin as a threat. I need to think about it, I said carefully. Of course. Feel free to wander the grounds. Consider it research. Her smile was sharp as broken glass. She wanted me to find something. I was sure of it as I moved through the estate, past rooms filled with centuries of plunder. But it wasn't until I found the stairs leading down, hidden behind a portrait of Lucinda from the 1600s, that I understood what. The lower levels were older than the house above, carved from stone that predated European settlement. And in a chamber that hummed with dark magic I found her. Rayna Michaelson. She lay on a stone altar, preserved in a supernatural coma, looking exactly as she must have 400 years ago. Young, maybe 19, with Kolin's sharp features softened by youth. Tubes of spelled glass connected her to vessels of blood that glowed with unnatural light. Lucinda wasn't just keeping her alive, she was using her blood, her essence for something. This was Kolin's chain. His sister. The family he thought he'd lost centuries ago, held hostage by the Empress who controlled his territory through fear and leverage. I could use this. Could manipulate Kolin with this information, turn his desperation into a weapon, complete my mission of revenge by destroying him from the inside out. But looking at Rayna's peaceful face, at the innocent vampire who'd never hurt anyone being used as a tool, I realized something that shattered every certainty I'd built my life on. The world wasn't black and white. Monsters and victims weren't cleanly divided by species. I'd been wrong. About so much. I found Kolin at his penthouse just before dawn, bypassing his security with techniques I shouldn't have known. He stood at the window and something in his posture told me he'd been expecting this. I need to tell you something, I said. All of it. So I did. I told him I was a Cruz, that I'd infiltrated his world to find Lucinda, that everything had been a lie. And then I told him about Rayna. The silence that followed was worse than screaming. When Kolin finally turned to face me, his expression was so carefully controlled it looked like a mask. But I could see the cracks in it, rage, betrayal, hurt bleeding through. You've been lying from the beginning, he said, and the coldness in his voice cut deeper than any blade. The fight, the dinner, the kiss, all of it was manipulation. You used me. Kolin. Get out. His power filled the room, pressing against me like a physical force. Get out, and if I see you again, I'll treat you as the enemy you are. I left with my heart breaking in a way I hadn't known was possible. How had I let this happen? How had I let myself care about the thing I was supposed to destroy? I made it 3 blocks before Lucinda's enforcers grabbed me. They dragged me back to the estate, to a chamber deep below ground where screams wouldn't carry. Lucinda was waiting and her smile was triumphant. I let you find Rayna, she said. Wanted to see what you'd do. Would you use the information like a proper hunter? Or would you prove you're too soft just like him? She stepped closer, trailing one cold finger down my cheek. You chose poorly. Now you'll die and I'll tell Kolin you attacked me, forcing me to defend myself. He'll never know the truth. The torture that followed was beyond anything I'd imagined. Vampire magic, designed to cause maximum pain without granting the mercy of unconsciousness. She wanted names. Other hunters working undercover, my network, everyone who'd helped me. I nearly broke. Nearly gave her everything just to make it stop. In my darkest moment, barely clinging to consciousness, I thought of my parents. Of the revenge I'd lived for. Of how hollow it all seemed now. I thought of Kolin's face when he'd kissed me in that alley. Of Rayna trapped in her coma. Of all the possibilities I'd destroyed with my hatred. I didn't want to die for revenge anymore. I wanted to live. To fix this. To save Rayna. To tell Kolin I was sorry. The door exploded inward just before dawn. Kolin stood in the doorway like an avenging angel, power radiating from him in waves that made even Lucinda's enforcers hesitate. "Let her go." "How touching," Lucinda purred. "The king comes to save his betrayer." The fight that erupted was devastating. Kolin was powerful, for centuries of accumulated strength unleashed in fury, but Lucinda's forces outnumbered him. I watched through blurred vision as he fought, knowing he was going to die because of me. With the last of my strength, I reached for the silver blade at my spine, the one coated in my own hunter blood. Toxic to vampires, deadly poison running through my crew's veins, but it could kill other vampires too. "Kolin!" I screamed and threw it. He caught it without looking, drove it through the heart of the enforcer who'd been about to tear his throat out. The vampire crumbled to ash and Kolin's eyes met mine across the chamber. Understanding flickered there. Trust despite everything. Together we fought our way out. My alchemy and his strength, my knowledge of hunter techniques and his centuries of combat experience. We moved like we'd been fighting together for years instead of minutes, and somehow, impossibly, we made it to the door as the first rays of dawn touched the horizon. The abandoned church was one of the few places vampires couldn't be tracked, consecrated ground disrupting magical traces. Kolin pulled me into the shadowed interior just as sunlight spilled across the threshold. I collapsed against him, blood seeping through his fingers as he tried to stop the bleeding from wounds I hadn't even felt in the adrenaline of escape. "Your sister," I whispered, consciousness fading. "I can help you save her. I know people, hunters who've studied Lucinda's magic. We can break the spell. We can free her." Colin's hand was shaking as he brushed hair from my face. I saw the moment he realized what I'd known since the Circle of Ash, since that dinner, since the kiss that had changed everything. He'd fallen in love with his natural enemy. "Stay alive," he begged, and his voice was raw with emotion I'd never heard from a creature centuries old. "Please, Rayna. Just stay alive." "I'm sorry," I whispered. "For lying. For everything. I'm so." Darkness took me before I could finish, leaving me uncertain whether I'd wake up at all. I woke to the taste of copper and centuries on my tongue. Vampire blood. Kolin's blood, healing wounds that should have killed me, knitting torn flesh and broken bones with magic that was both salvation and taboo. The bond it created between us hummed like a live wire beneath my skin. "You're awake." Kolin's voice came from the shadows. We were in a safe house I didn't recognize, warded so heavily I could feel the protective spells pressing against my hunter senses. "I gave you my blood. It was the only way to save you. I know what you did." I sat up slowly, testing my newly healed body. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Lucinda won't stop. She's planning something bigger than controlling me." He moved into the light and I saw the exhaustion etched into his immortal features. "She's going to use Isla's blood to create daywalkers. An army of vampires who can hunt in sunlight. It would destroy the balance between our species forever. We had to stop her. But we couldn't do it alone. The call to Father Torres was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I've fallen for him," I admitted, my voice steady despite the shame burning in my chest. "I know what that makes me. But we need to work together to stop Lucinda or everything. Hunters, humans, peaceful vampires. All of it burns." The silence stretched for an eternity. Then, "You're a traitor to your bloodline, Rayna Cruz." "I know. But I'm asking anyway." Most of the Hunter Network refused. Called me corrupted, lost, a disgrace to my parents' memory. But Garrett agreed to help. And Father Torres, after a long moment, said, "Your mother's last words were to stay human. Maybe you're the only one of us who actually listened." Meanwhile, Kolin reached out to vampire lords tired of Lucinda's brutality. Lords who remembered when vampires and humans had maintained an uneasy peace instead of the predatory hierarchy she'd built. An alliance formed, fragile, unlikely but real. The Crimson Eclipse would occur in 3 days. During the ritual, Lucinda would be powerful but distracted and Isla would be vulnerable. It was our only chance. The assault on Lucinda's estate was everything I'd feared and more. Hunters and vampires fighting side by side, a sight that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. Silver blades and supernatural strength working in terrible harmony against the Empress's forces. The air filled with ash from destroyed vampires and the screams of wounded humans. Kolin and I fought our way through the chaos toward the ritual chamber. The bond between us, strengthened by his blood in my veins, made us move like a single weapon. I anticipated his strikes before he made them. He covered my weaknesses without me asking. We'd both drunk each other's blood now, creating something unprecedented between hunter and vampire. We burst into the chamber as the crimson eclipse reached its peak. Lucinda stood at the center of a circle of power, Isla's unconscious form surrounded by her chosen soldiers, vampires about to receive the gift of daywalking. "How predictable," Lucinda said, and her power made the air vibrate. The weak king and his pet hunter, come to die together. The fight was desperate from the first strike. Lucinda had 8 centuries of accumulated power, and the eclipse magnified it beyond reason. She moved faster than anything I'd ever seen, hit harder than should be possible. Kolin matched her blow for blow, but barely. "You were always too soft, nephew," she mocked, her attacks driving him back. "Too human. That's why you'll never truly rule." I threw every technique I knew at her. Alchemical fire, blessed weapons, the forbidden Cruz family secrets. Nothing was enough. She was simply too ancient, too powerful. Then I understood. There was one thing we hadn't tried. "Kolin," I called out, dodging a strike that would have torn my head off. "My blood. Drink deep." Hunter blood was poison to vampires. Everyone knew that. The Cruz bloodline carried it concentrated, deadly. But we already had a bond, our blood already mixed. Maybe, just maybe, it could kill me, Kolin said, understanding immediately. "Trust me." He caught my wrist, pulled me close despite Lucinda's laughter, and drank. Not the delicate feeding of a civilized vampire, but deep, desperate gulps of blood that should have burned through his system like acid. The power that erupted was like nothing I'd ever felt. Kolin's entire body lit from within, hunter magic mixing with vampire strength, creating something new. Something neither human nor monster but both. When he faced Lucinda again, he moved with impossible speed, struck with impossible precision. The ancient empress's eyes went wide with shock as he tore through her defenses like paper. "This is for everyone you've hurt," Kolin said, and drove a blade through her shoulder, pinning her to the altar. "For every life you've destroyed. For my sister." He didn't kill her. That would have made him the monster she was. Instead, he spoke words in a language older than English, binding her with supernatural chains that would strip her power and force her into exile. "This isn't over," Lucinda snarled as the magic took hold. "I'll come back. I'll destroy everything you're trying to build. Then we'll be ready," I said, and watched as she dissolved into shadow and fled. We broke the spell holding Isla. She woke slowly, disoriented, for 100 years stolen from her. When she finally focused on Kolin's face, tears, actual tears from a vampire, streamed down his cheeks. "Brother," she whispered. "I'm here. You're safe now." Isla's eyes found me. "Who's the human?" "Someone very important," Kolin said, and his sister smiled knowingly. The aftermath was chaos. The vampire world split over Kolin's alliance with hunters, some calling it visionary, others demanding his execution for treason. My hunter family officially disavowed me, declaring me a traitor to humanity. We'd both lost our old worlds. But we'd found something better. 6 months later, I stood in the training center Kolin and I had built in Asheville, North Carolina. A neutral zone where vampires seeking peace and humans seeking understanding could coexist. I was teaching a mixed combat class when she walked in. The girl was maybe 19, bruised, terrified, with the desperate look of someone who'd run out of options. "I need help," she said. "My boyfriend, he's a vampire and he won't let me leave." Kolin appeared in the doorway and we shared a look that needed no words. This was our purpose now, helping others escape the cycles of violence we'd barely survived ourselves. That night, on our balcony overlooking the city, Kolin took my hand. "Marry me," he said. "Not a vampire binding, not a human ceremony, but something new. A union between worlds." "You don't have a ring," I said, smiling. "We don't need rings. We have something better. We have choice." As we kissed under the stars, I knew our fight wasn't over. Lucinda was still out there somewhere plotting revenge. Orthodox hunters and traditional vampires both wanted us dead. The world we were building was fragile, constantly threatened. But for the first time since my parents died, I felt hope instead of hatred. And Kolin, after 4 centuries of existence, finally felt truly alive. They say vampires and hunters can never coexist, that we're natural enemies, that our war is eternal. Maybe they're right. Or maybe, just maybe, the strongest thing we can do is choose love over legacy, hope over hatred, and build something new from the ashes of old wars. My name is Rayna Cruz Michaelson. And this is just the beginning of our story.